for the what, why, and how of storytelling from Pixar veteran Jason Katz, who will share with you the lessons he's learned over the last 24 years as a member of the famed animation studio's story department. In this keynote, Jason will break down the storytelling process and illustrate many of the tools he and his colleagues use to create memorable characters and satisfying stories for all ages. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pixar veteran Jason Katz.
Thank you, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? All right, great. My voice is not always that loud. Thank you very much for coming. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Katz, and like Clark said, I've been lucky enough to work at Pixar Animation Studios for the last 24 years, half my life, and I've worked in the story department there. So I played the role in crafting 11 of our 20 films, and I just recently finished up a 6-year stint as co-creator and story supervisor on our Academy Award-winning film, Coco.
Woo!
Thank you. And today I'm here to talk to you guys about storytelling. So picture this, a 6-year-old boy sitting at a brown 1970s Formica dining room table. There's a stack of white paper in front of him, and there's probably some colored pencils and some broken crayons. And into the room appears a heavy-set woman with a kind face and loving eyes. And she smiles and sits down next to the boy. And together, they grab a piece of paper and a crayon and we begin to draw. Every day of my young life, I did this with my grandmother. She would come downstairs after taking my brother up for a nap, or I'd come home from school and I'd race to our drawing station, and it was there that my bub, that's what I called her, taught me how to draw. But at that age, I was impatient, and I would grow really frustrated with my progress. My scribbles, they looked nothing like my idols in my comic books or my art books. I would say, my drawings don't look anything like Garfield, and my Bob, she had a way of calming me down and focusing me on the bigger picture. She would put up a piece of tracing paper and put it over the drawing, and she would show me the simple shapes that the artist was using. And I would learn to see that Garfield was really just a series of ovals, and Mickey Mouse, well, he's just 3 circles. And I began to notice that when I saw those shapes first, if I paid attention to the structure underneath, my drawings were more successful. And my bub was also a film buff. She loved movies. And so I learned to love movies. Every day, I'd race to our family mailbox and collect our TV guide for the upcoming week. And listed in the front of the TV guide were the movies that were going to be played for that week, and their movie critic would rate them. And it would be from 1 to 5, and 5 were like the best movies coming. And I would circle those 5s, those 5-star movies, and we would plan our day around watching those films. And they would make us cry, they'd make us laugh, and we would be transported to all these far-off places. And at the end of the movies, my grandma would ask me, what did I like? And we would talk about what worked and what didn't work. And she would say to me, I like movies that make me feel something. And that was her criterion. That was what was important to her. If she was happy, well, she was all in. And those formative years with my grandma, well, those are foundational to who I am today. That boring brown dining room table led me to a life as an artist. It led me to study animation in school and ultimately to Pixar. And so when I was asked to speak to you all today, a place that we're surrounded by people on the cutting edge of a new and exciting technology, my first instinct, to be quite honest, was to try to talk about something innovative and talk about the future and something that's techie. And certainly someone from Pixar can do that. I mean, this company is known for pushing the boundaries of technology and art. But my talk today is about storytelling. And to me, good storytelling, well, it's achieved the same way today as it was 1,000 years ago. A good story starts with the same lessons that I learned from my grandmother when I was a child, and I use them at Pixar every day. So, for the brief time we're together, and apologies to the kind folks at AWE, I'd love for all of you just to leave the world of AR and VR behind you. Leave it out those doors. And all you need right now is a blank piece of paper and maybe a broken crayon if you got one, and a story that you want to tell. And with a potential abundance of hubris on my part, I'm going to make a promise to you. My promise is that when you walk away from this talk, we will talk and you will learn stories or steps and techniques to transform an okay story into a good story. Right? I'm not promising a great story. Right? The difference between good and great is massive. It's a challenge for even the most seasoned storyteller. For me, it's like the difference between Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, with Sean Connery, the third one. Both are directed by Steven Spielberg. Both star Harrison Ford. One is a great movie, arguably one of the finest action-adventure films of modern cinema. It's one of my favorite films of all time. The other one is a good movie. It's got a bitchin' opening with River Phoenix as a young indie, and after that, it's safe to say it's good. Today, we're just going to focus on good. Because the promise of great would be foolish, it would be unfair, and look, in my mind, good stories, a world of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade sounds like a nice place to be, so let's try to get our stories there first, okay? So at Pixar, we make every one of our films for a broad audience. They're intended for everyone, all ages, and ideally they have themes and characters that anyone can relate to. And to do this consistently over 24 years, each of our stories have a handful of things in common. First off, telling a good story takes patience. At Pixar, we spend years developing our films. We change, we refine, we patiently build our stories from a kernel of an idea into a full-on feature. Chuck Jones, the director of a lot of my favorite Bugs Bunny animated shorts, he would say, all of us have 100,000 bad drawings inside of us. And the sooner we get rid of them, the better it will be for everyone. And at Pixar, we kind of follow Chuck's truth. We like to fail early and often. Our story process is meant to be fast and flexible. We use scripts, hand-drawn storyboards, pencils, papers. Sure, there's a computer thrown in every once in a while, but the creation of our stories is pretty much the same technology Walt Disney used to develop Snow White in the early 1930s. Second, I told him I wasn't going to go backwards, but I just did. Second, we strive to have our films have something honest and emotional to say, to have themes that are universal and meaningful to us all. And third, our films tend to come from a personal place within the filmmakers. So a film could be inspired from a moment in the director's personal life. It could be a question the storyteller has it's compelled them to go and tell it in an animated film. In all cases, we attempt to find stories from a real place. A place that means something significant to the individuals that are tasked to bring it to life. And lastly, we tend to use a classic storytelling structure to build a solid foundation for our stories. So even though a film like Up is worlds away from a film like WALL-E, they're both supported by the same spine. So in my opinion, these are the four things any storyteller should use to tell a good story. They must have patience. They should have characters and a thematic that the audience is going to care about. Ideally, these characters come from a real and honest place, and they are constructed with a structure that's clear. All right, so how do we do this? Well, I love murder mystery stories. I love gumshoe films in which a private eye pieces together puzzles of a murder to eventually, find the killer. Or like a whip-smart British detective on BBC, knows to ask the right questions, and she gets all the various suspects together. She recreates the hidden narrative of the crime. So in my opinion, writing a good story, it uses the same tools Sherlock Holmes or Sam Spade would use. You need to ask the right questions in the right order. And at work, when I attempt to create a new story, I tend to use the classic investigatory questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how. Before even writing a single page of script, finding simple, clear answers to these 6 questions, well, it's going to go a long way into creating a successful story. However, I believe the questions should be answered in a slightly different order. So I put them in this order. I put them who, when, and where. Then I put what, why, and how. So let's break it down. First, who? Who is usually the first question asked. Who is this story about? Who is your main character or your protagonist? Without a main character, well, it's tough to begin a story, right? So for example, the who of Ratatouille is Remy, a rat. Next is where and when. And both of these, again, are simple questions. They set the tone. They set the location of your story. And again, using Ratatouille, the when is present day and where is Paris. So who, when, and where, those are usually the easiest questions to answer because they're quite often the first things you think of when you're coming up with a story. But now for the real work. What? What is the first tough question to answer? It's at the early stages of development. Answering a what question, well, that's going to help you find the engine of your story. What is this story about? What does your main character want? In Ratatouille, Remy wants to follow his passion to cook, regardless of his station in life or what rules the world put upon him. So what is Ratatouille about? Well, it's a story about a rat who wants to be a chef. Why? Well, why is the second big one to nail down? And why is your protagonist going on the journey? That's a big why. Why do we believe this journey, or do they believe this journey is going to lead them towards their goal? So the answer to this question is often your theme. It's your premise. So you understand the answers to these questions, understand the answer to this question, why, right? It also is going to help us relate and empathize with your main character. If we understand why your protagonist has a particular point of view, well, we're going to root for them, and we're going to cheer for them as they go through the story. So why does he believe he can achieve his dream? Well, because Auguste Cousteau, right, the famous chef, he said anybody can cook. And that great chef's philosophy, well, it gave validation to Remy's passion. And then finally we get to how, and the answers to how are your movie. It's the culmination of all the answers to the previous questions. You put them in a pot, you stir them, and you create a meal. How is your hero challenged on their journey? How do they change? How is the world different because of this adventure they went on? So at Pixar, we spend the majority of our time trying to answer these last three questions. What, why, and how. We'll spend months in front of a whiteboard asking and answering questions, and it's in an attempt to craft believable, relatable arcs for our characters. And at the beginning of the script writing process, we tend to focus on two really important what questions. What does the character want, and what does the character need? This is really helpful in breaking down the character's arc, the way they change throughout the film. And it's also a great tool to find the plot that supports your character's growth throughout the story. Most often the want and their needs are mirror reflections of each other. So for example, in Inside Out, Joy, and I apologize, I'm going to ruin a lot of Pixar movies for you today. I should have warned you ahead of time. In Inside Out, Joy wants to maintain control of the console, right? Because up to this point in her life, happiness is all Riley knows, right? And Riley's primary emotion is happiness. So that's what she wants. But what she needs is to recognize that Riley is changing. Riley's the little girl that they're inside their head. She's growing up, and growing up is about managing complex emotions. So it's important that sadness drives the console sometimes. Yeah. Carl wants to hold on to his life with his departed wife, Ellie. And again, spoiler, if Carl got that house to Angel Falls like he wanted, I pretty much promise you he was going to sit in that chair until he rotted away and died. So again, don't tell the kids that, but what he needs is to let go of Ellie. He needs to live his life without her. Every one of our films, our main characters go through a change like this, where their want and their need flip through the course of the movie. And structurally, the first act of our stories is where the main character will identify what they want, and they'll set off in search of it. And then the second act will end with them realizing the errors of their ways and insight has gained what they've needed all along. So, an early attempt for us to answer a why question often come from the personal places I was talking about earlier. So for example, Pete Docter, His inspiration for Inside Out was his young preteen daughter. And he wanted to know why the happy girl he knew as a child was changing into a more emotionally complex 12-year-old. He was curious about what the heck was going on inside her head. Andrew Stanton created Finding Nemo based on his relationship with his young son and about his own parenting style. He found that he was trying to protect his son from every danger in the world, and even if that protection meant he was sacrificing the boy's freedom to grow. But Andrew asked himself, why am I doing this? And Nemo was born. If you can find an honest, personal connection to your story, well, you have a better chance of having another human relate to it. They'll hopefully see themselves in your character. They'll empathize with their journey. A personal connection to a story is, frankly, it's the secret sauce in a Pixar movie. It's the question, or it's the answer to the question I always get, which is, how do we come up with things? And at Pixar, we use why questions to find moments to help us understand our character. So again, for Finding Nemo, we knew Marlin was going to be an overprotective parent. This was based on Andrew's inspiration for the story, right? But in an attempt to have the audience relate to our main character, we knew they needed to know why he was like this. The audience, they needed to come, or they needed to care about this nervous fish and understand why he was holding his young son back, why he was keeping Nemo from being like all the other kids in the reef. Marlin's want, again, in the first act was to protect his son no matter what. So to do this, we had to show the audience why Marlin was afraid. So our answer was why Marlin overprotective was a prologue in which a barracuda kills his wife, all of his newborn children, except for one. Because murder in the first 5 minutes is a good idea for a family film. But regardless if your story is inspired by real life or a burning question in your brain, it's fundamental for it to be honest. Andrew Stanton's mantra is make me care. And he's laser focused on us having a quality answer to that. Quality answer to why we care early on in the process. Because if you can't make us care about your main character, identify with their want or empathize with their need, then none of us are going to root for them along the way and cheer for them when they achieve their goals. So collecting the answers to the why and the what questions are essential. But where the rubber meets the road is how you use them. And at Pixar, every one of our films is based on a simple 3-act structure. And for the non-film students in the audience, a simple 3-act structure is a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, the first act, second act, third act. And this structure demands that there's change in your story. That the main character's world is vastly different from the beginning than it is at the end. Again, using Ratatouille as an example, at the beginning of Ratatouille, Remy had to hide his passion for food, that he was stuck in his station for life and he would never change. A rat couldn't cook. But by the end of the film, he was cooking, unmasked in front of everyone. And the world that once rejected him now was celebrating him. And frankly, all of us wanted to have him cook for us, a rat. So a 3-act structure is essential, but it's not a formula, right? It's a skeleton. And okay, so all of us here are built off the same skeleton with the same amount of bones. Assumption, but I'm assuming we all are built off a skeleton. And that's holding our flesh together, yet we look vastly different from each other, and the stories are the same. So to navigate my 3-act structure, I use this. And this is called a timeline. And I know it looks boring, but it's the best tool I know to tell a good story. I love timelines. This line is like your story from 10,000 feet. And once I've divided that line up into my acts, my beginning, my middle, and my end, I start to hang some things on the line. And these are the things that are the 6 questions we talked about earlier. Traditionally, you'll find the who, the when, the where, often the what, the why, early in a Pixar film. And I'd hang those on early on the line. But we also want to tell you what the character wants and why he or she wants it, and we give you that by the end of the first act. So using Coco as an example, we give the audience the answer to all 6 of these questions in the prologue. Who's the story about? Miguel. Where is it set? It's set in Mexico. When? In present day. What's it about? Well, it's about a boy who wants to play music like De La Cruz. And why does he want to? Because he feels a connection with this famous musician. But that's rarely, there's rarely one moment, or we rarely have one moment that's enough to give you to have the audience connect with your character emotionally. Most often we need to kind of revisit those same questions often in the first act. So in the first scene, after the prologue, Miguel is shining shoes and he's telling Mariachi that he wants to play music out loud. And we emphasize and underline what the characters want, and that is our what question. And we tell you how he's going to get his want, right? Because there's a talent show coming in the plaza, and he has a chance to follow De La Cruz's advice to seize his moment. And we emphasize why later on, a few scenes later, because we have this beautiful duet with Miguel and De La Cruz up in his hideout. And we see the bond that Miguel has for Ernesto De La Cruz, but more importantly, we also see the passion Miguel has for playing guitar. Another storytelling we use is on the timeline is bookends, or bookends. And I love bookends. Bookends are moments that relate to each other on different parts of your story. So for example, a scene you hang on the timeline in the first act, most often it has a brother-sister moment later on in the movie. So here's how it looks on the timeline. In our setup of Toy Story, we see what Woody's life is like. We see that he has a kid named Andy. He's Andy's favorite toy, and that Woody's the leader of a group of toys, right? His world is stable and he's in control. The next beat on our line is called the inciting incident. The inciting incident is the event or decision that begins your story's problem. It's either the best or the worst thing for your main character, and it often propels your main character towards their want. In Toy Story, the inciting incident is Buzz Lightyear showing up. Propelled by this inciting incident, your character has a moment where they clearly understand emotionally what's at stake for them, and we underline their want. In Toy Story, Woody losing his favorite toy status in the room. Well, he wants, and we tell you, he wants to get that back by any means possible. Now, the bulk of the movie is the second act, and it's going to consist of scenes that will reflect and mirror things that we talked about in the first act, and things that are connected to the why questions. And by the time you get to the end of your second act, your main character has traditionally gone through many ups and many downs, and all of this is in search of their want. But their journey has forced them to reassess their goals. Usually there's an epiphany, and out of this new way of thinking, they learn their need. It's a bookend to the double downing scene we spoke about earlier of the main character's want in the first act. And in Toy Story, this is the moment at Sid's house. Woody's under the crate, Buzz is strapped to a rocket, Sid's gonna blow him up in the morning. And this is the moment in the film that Woody realizes that he was selfish, and he relinquishes his quest to be Andy's favorite toy. It's the opposite side of the coin from that first act moment. That epiphany then soon follows the climax, is followed by the climax, and that's the bookend to the inciting incident, right? So in Toy Story, Woody now teams up with his rival. In the inciting incident, Buzz was the thing that was keeping him from what he wanted, and now Buzz is the thing he needs to get to use to get his need, right? They're now a team. And if your hero survives the climax, we mirror our setup with the resolution. We see how things are different because of our hero's journey. Woody and Buzz are now friends and find themselves back in Andy's arms. So I'm confident there's a lot of good stories out there, and they're just waiting to be told. And we're just starting to see the type of things VR and AR can do to enhance our stories. So to return to my not-so-humble promise that I made to you earlier, to find your good story, I ask you a few things. Be patient. Ask yourself the right questions in the right order. Structure your story so that we care about the characters. And make sure your story has a meaningful change from beginning to end. Now at this conference, you're going to be surrounded by some amazing, mind-blowing innovation. And I'm truly excited to see what the future holds. But I'm also reminded of a quote by Walt Disney, and Walt said, you can design, you can create, you can build the most wonderful place in the world, but it takes people to make that dream a reality. And to me, that's where the storytelling comes in. Stories are about bringing people together. They exist to share an honest truth. And so if you could have me put on a pair of goggles and you could take me to a world that's similar to the one I know or vastly different, my hope is that you take me on an emotional journey. One that's full of insight, where things change, where characters arc, and most importantly, that you make me care. If you can do that, I'm certain you'll have yourself a good story. And I know it would be one of those stories that would make my grandma proud. So with that, I'd like to thank Prezi for helping me create this presentation. You can try it yourself at booth 946. I think it's a great storytelling tool. I'd like to thank AWE for hosting an incredible conference. And with much gratitude, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Have a great day. Thank you.